Welcome to the Gay Liberation Network on CAN TV. My name is Andy Thayer, and with me tonight is Joe Iosbaker, who is co-chair of the Committee against Political Repression here in Chicago. For those who aren't familiar with the Gay Liberation Network, we're a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender direct action organization here in Chicago, and a little bit later in the program we'll be sharing with you some information about upcoming activities of the Gay Liberation Network. But the next most important thing is something happening next Tuesday that Joe is going to be telling us a bit about. The Gay Liberation Network, we focus on LGBT issues, but part of being involved in any kind of freedom struggle is standing up for the freedom of all who are fighting for freedom. And that's one of the things that Joe, as well as many other anti-war and international solidarity activists, have been doing of late, and why they have been targeted by the FBI in a recent series of raids in September of this past year. We in the Gay Liberation Network know that in order to fight for rights, as people have shown right around the world, you have to have the right to organize for those rights. And in fact, we're going to be bringing in a Russian gay leader in the latter part of February who'll be talking some about that. But and their struggle has shown over and over again, if you don't have the right to organize, then you can't even begin to take the first baby steps to organize for any kind of rights, including LGBT rights. And that's why Joe, while he wasn't targeted for LGBT rights activism, he was targeted for anti-war and international solidarity organizing. That's why his struggle and the struggle of so many others who have been targeted by these raids is important to people, gay and non-gay alike. So Joe, tell us a little bit, give us the background. Assume our audience doesn't know about the series of raids that began in late September.
Well, on the morning of excuse me, on the morning of September 24th, there were half a dozen homes and several offices of anti-war activists across the Midwest that were raided in a dawn raid involving over 70 federal agents of the Joint Terrorism Task Force led by the FBI. My home in Logan Square, I got a knock on the door at 7 a.m. And opened the door, and the man flashed his big Federal Bureau of Investigation badge and handed me a warrant to search my home. I turned to my wife, and I actually said to her, Stephanie, it's the thought police, because their warrant indicated that our support for struggles against U.S. military engagements overseas had led them to investigate us.
And the funny thing about this is there are any number of the sort of struggles that many political leaders who've gone on to bigger and better things, if you will, in this country, they would be accused under the same statute, supposedly, the so-called material aid for terrorism. Now President Barack Obama, back when he was a student, was a supporter of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, and the organizations that were principally responsible for that struggle against apartheid, namely the African National Congress, were called terrorist organizations by then President Reagan.
That's right.
So the irony is now you have President Obama persecuting people in the way that he himself would have been persecuted executed if these same awful court precedents had been in place back in the 1980s. It should be noted that the stricture under which Joe and others have been targeted is a horrible court precedent that was set in late June of last year, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that even basically talking to other organizations who are deemed terrorists, automatically deemed terrorist by the State Department, makes you a material aider of terrorism, which by that definition, for example, former President Carter, when he has been trying to broker peace in the Middle East, would be considered, but I think he's probably considered too big a fish to fry, at least at this point.
Well, I know that he has spoken against the very legal decision that has been cited by the Justice Department in raiding our home and in subpoenaing 23 of us to testify to a grand jury. The Supreme Court decision that you referred to, Andy, is called Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, and I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I'm certainly very aware of it now. It did exactly as you said. It says that any activity, for example, my wife is an activist with the Palestine Solidarity Group here in Chicago, and they've been very involved in the boycott, divestment campaigns, to put pressure on the government of Israel to try to relieve the terror that the Palestinians live under. And so supporting the Palestinians, essentially what they're saying now is coordinating your activities with any organization that the U.S. State Department determines is a terrorist organization equals material support for a foreign terrorist organization. And they are trying. We are the test case. We are the test case. That's essentially what we are. We are their guinea pigs.
Well, and the thing that's particularly atrocious about this is the ridiculous double standard that's at work here. It was just a few weeks ago that WikiLeaks, for example, one of their signal contributions to removing the blinders on what American foreign policy is really about, revealed that the Israeli government very frankly told the Obama administration that they were going to keep the sanctions in terms of the blockade of the Gaza Strip down to a point just above bare material subsistence, that just enough to avoid an humanitarian catastrophe. Well, those who have visited the territories and talked to people there say there is a humanitarian catastrophe and that people can't get the adequate medical supplies and treatment that they need due to the blockade. But when a state like Israel, which gets billions of dollars, $3 billion a year, I believe, from the United States, conducts activities like that, then it's not terrorism. But merely talking to organizations allegedly involved in terrorism is considered material aid to terrorism. It's, as you've referred to it once before, an Orwellian sort of circumstance that you find yourselves in, that here we have American military bases littered about the globe. In most countries, they're not wanted there, and yet the United States is going around and calling organizations terrorist. Not that you have to be in love with any of these organizations, but you have to see the hypocrisy behind that charge when it comes from the U.S. State Department. Now, Joe, there was another very disturbing development that some of you who watch, for example, Democracy Now! And other good news outlets would have learned this past week, and that is that it was revealed that there was a infiltrator in the Minnesota Anti-War Committee operating before even the Republican National Convention for a period of a couple of years. And this person didn't only just passively attend meetings. We've had evidence of that here in Chicago with our anti-war organizing here in Chicago, going back for several years now. Mm-hmm. This person actually positioned herself as a spokesperson for the group, which has got to be a violation of federal statute and any number of court precedents. I mean, there is a unfortunately, some legal basis allegedly for spying because the civil liberties have been so destroyed in this country. But the notion that someone can actually go into an organization and plot the direction of that organization, that's very much like the COINTELPRO program of the 1960s.
A lot of people are making that comparison. You're exactly right, and if people want to read more about it, they can go to the website stopfbi.net. But in the spring of 2008, all of the anti-war movement in the Midwest, and especially in the Twin Cities, was preparing for the Republican National Convention, which was held there starting on Labor Day that year. And this woman showed up calling herself Karen Sullivan, and we have had it confirmed now through the U.S. Attorney that she is in fact a law enforcement agent. Mm-hmm. And she moved in, became active in the anti-war committee, and over the next 2.5 years also actually joined the Freedom Road Socialist Organization that I'm a member of. And she not only was a very active person, but she became a leader. She gave speeches about U.S. support for the government of Israel, for example. And in the summer of 2009, she was one of 3 women from the Twin Cities that went on a delegation, a fact-finding delegation, to the West Bank, and they were stopped at the Tel Aviv airport. And now we have learned through the U.S. Attorney that her the evidence that she gathered about the fact that this committee was going in sympathy with the Palestinians, mm-hmm. that was turned over to her organization, to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, mm-hmm. and they in turn turned it over to the Israelis. The Israelis stopped the delegation at the airport and returned them all 3. So,
unless you think that this is something unique to the Twin Cities, we had evidence actually as part of some discovery that's happened in some lawsuits I'm involved in that Chicago police were infiltrating organizing meetings of anti-war coalitions in 2005. We don't know what's happened since then, but I think it would be naive to assume that it hasn't continued in one form or another. Before we go further on our conversation with Joe Iosbaker of the Committee Against Political Repression, I'd like to point out a few things that are coming up on your screen there. If we can get our computer working here. Bear with us. Here we go. Freedom to Marry Day is coming up on just the day before Valentine's Day, Sunday, February 13th, in front of Holy Name Cathedral, 735 North State Street. Many of you may be aware that Cardinal George has made a whole series of statements against equal marriage for gay people. Recently, the front page of the Windy City Times here in Chicago quoted him while he's been on a jury in Boston, once again speaking out against equality. We in the Gay Liberation Network are not going to take this sitting down. We're going to be protesting out in front of Holy Name Cathedral. He, as head of a tax-exempt organization, went into overdrive to try to defeat the civil unions bill that recently passed here in Illinois. And we, as taxpayers, believe that we have the right to protest in front of his tax-exempt organization's edifice there on State Street. So we'll be doing that on Sunday, February 13th. And a little bit of information about what Joe was talking about. We've got upcoming a National Day of Protest against FBI repression, and that's coming up Tuesday, January 25th. There's a sign there you see from our friends up in the Twin Cities. These are basically the demands we're asking, or demanding that the stop the grand jury investigation, that they return the property that's been confiscated from Joe and other activists, and of course stop the FBI repression. And here in Chicago, we're going to have the protest at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, January 25th at 219 South Dearborn. Again, this is to demand a stop of the witch hunt, stop the end of the grand jury investigation. People should not be exposed to this kind of repression in a country that is allegedly free. And then finally, coming up on February 26th, at a location to be announced, we're going to have Nikolai Alexeyev, who is the foremost gay leader in Russia, is going to be visiting Chicago as part of a nationwide tour organized by the Gay Liberation Network. We encourage you to check that out. Now, Joe, I'd like to talk a little bit about the political context here, because many people, including yourself, supported President Obama in his election against McCain and Palin. And there's a little bit of irony now that a good friend, you're unfortunately on the receiving end of his Justice Department, as is one who did solidarity work with Arabs and Muslims who were facing repression shortly after 9/11. They were largely supporters of the Republicans before that happened. Where does this sort of leave you in all that?
Well, first, let me just say that I didn't actually endorse Barack Obama, and I voted for Cynthia McKinney.
Okay, good for you.
However, if I had been in a state where it was closer, I probably would have voted for Obama in order to stop the Republicans. And I believe that it was still a good thing that the Republicans were defeated, because I think the eyes of the world were on us. And so it is certainly the case that while I didn't have any great expectations, I didn't expect this. And one thing is that I've been to Washington twice to get legislators to stand up on their hind legs and speak on our behalf to Obama and Holder.
Yeah.
And what we have found in Washington is the progressives in Congress, they're really concerned about FBI repression of the anti-war movement. And we actually finally got Senator Durbin this week to make a statement on our behalf expressing his grave concern. But we need a lot more out of them. So please, call your legislator, call your senator. Thank Senator Durbin for speaking on our behalf, and urge them to do more. Urge them to send the message directly to Obama and to Holder.
Yeah, and certainly we saw any number of civil liberties attacks under the Bush administrations. But I think it's important to note, just historically, we had situations where some of the most serious attacks on civil liberties have actually come from Democratic administrations. I mean, going back to, for example, Wilson, the president during World War I, who ran for re-election on a pledge of "he kept us out of war." That didn't work out too well, but the so-called Sedition Act, under which they're attempting to go after the WikiLeaks founder, is something that was inaugurated under his administration. Also, Truman, loyalty oath. So, I mean, not Carter, but the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Bill of Bill Clinton. So we've had a number of problems out of Democrats, too. We're going to take a caller now. Okay. Caller, you're on CAN TV. What's your question or comment, please? Hello?
Followed by a question. My comment is that, first of all, I'm proud to have gone to the website first to stop FBI repression. I made a donation. And I plan to be downtown on the 25th. I'll be there with my placard. And I wanted to say, Dr. King, as I recall, he was a very vocal anti-war activist for the last 3 years of his life, Martin Luther King. And I was just thinking, if he were alive today, he probably would have been subpoenaed by the FBI or by Patrick Fitzgerald. The other thing is, I heard or read somewhere that grand juries are a bad approach to justice. Grand juries in general are just a bad idea. Maybe you guys could explain the specifics of why that is, because I don't know exactly why, but I believe that's probably true, that the grand juries are just a bad idea.
Yeah, they unfortunately lend themselves to a great deal of abuse in that if they give you immunity, you basically have very little protections against being forced to testify, and that's the situation facing many activists right now, as Joe well knows.
Well, when we go downtown on the 25th, caller, we're going to take Pat Fitzgerald a ham sandwich, because what our lawyers have said to us since the start of this is that any prosecutor worth his or her salt can indict a ham sandwich in front of one of these grand juries. They're basically kangaroo courts. not only is there no judge, not only do you not have the right to have a lawyer present, the jury is not screened for bias. You have no right to confront your any witnesses brought against you. You have no right to see the source of the evidence brought against you. You have no right to present your own evidence. You have no right to present your own witnesses. And 98% of grand juries result in indictments. And that's why my wife and I and the other 14 of us that were called to the grand jury back in October, all of us said that we refused to testify. We won't be part of that witch hunt.
And the problem is that if you refuse to testify, you very likely will be imprisoned without any trial, period, for not testifying. We do have another caller. We're going to have to be brief here because we're running out of time. Caller, you're on CAN TV. What's your question or comment, please?
Hi, I was just wondering what activists or non-activists can do to support GLN and those that have been raided by the FBI.
Mm-hmm. Joe?
Well, the first thing is you should everyone should get informed about this. Go to stopfbi.net, sign up for the email list. You'll see when you go there that almost 200 organizations around the country and around the world have already adopted resolutions on our behalf, unions representing 500,000 workers, including my own union, the Service Employees Local 73. Second, please come out to the demonstration on the 25th. That is the date when 9 people who were subpoenaed after us, subpoenaed in the month of December, including 6 Palestinian Americans, they have been ordered to appear before the grand jury that day, and we have to go and stand with them and say we will not be intimidated. The anti-war movement, all progressive people, the Palestinian community, we have to stand together against this attack.
And I think part of the purpose of this demonstration next Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. at Federal Plaza is to say, look, we need to change the political climate where it says it's okay to conduct these sort of raids, these witch hunts that Joe, his wife, and so many others are facing, that we have to actually put the onus on the government and say the government is wrong here, and the political leaders who are directing this, President Obama, you bear personal responsibility for what your Justice Department is doing. You can say, well, I'm not the big old bad George Bush, but with things like this, with things like Guantanamo, with things like the extraordinary rendition and the assassinations abroad and the drone attacks and so forth, it's part and parcel of a general picture of political repression and an executive branch that has basically the leash is off and they're able to do what they want. And we have to say, we don't care what party you're with, if you're for these kinds of repressions, we are going to make life difficult for you. And that's why everyone needs to be out of that demonstration next Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. at 219 South Dearborn. We don't have just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to close with a few announcements here. Again, the protest next Tuesday, and then we've got Freedom to Marry Day coming up Sunday, February 13th. And our next meeting of GLN is 7 p.m. Wednesday, February 2nd, the first Wednesday of each month at the Burger Park Cultural Center, corner of Sheridan and Granville. Our next show on CAN TV is going to be 6:30 p.m. Friday, February 11th, generally the second Friday of each month. And then finally, please mark your calendars for Saturday, February 26th, at a location to be announced, when Nikolai Alexeyev, a man whom I've had the pleasure to visit in Russia and take part in illegal gay pride demonstrations, will be visiting Chicago, the first leg on his national tour. Again, this has been Andy Thayer with the Gay Liberation Network. Thank you, Joe Iosbaker, for standing not just up for your rights, but for all of our rights. This is a very serious attack that you're facing, and I'm happy to call you a friend, and we're with you, brother.
I want to let everyone know that Andy was the first person to call us while the FBI was still in our house. Andy called us before 10 o'clock in the morning because he had heard through the grapevine that what was happening to us, and it meant so much to us, that phone call. Thank you.
I'm very proud. Again, this has been the Gay Liberation Network on CAN TV. Thanks so much for watching.